Hello everyone, it's Jasmine Newman from Parenting After Separation. I decided today to re-record the webinar that we produced, or I produced on behalf of Family Law 101. I think it was on the 11th of March. We were unable to record it at that time. There was just a few tech difficulties and a lot of people on the call. So I wanted to record it today so that everybody could have a copy of it. So I'm going to get started now. I'm just going to share my screen and I'll just be recording this to no audience, so there won't be any questions. I won't be able to filter any questions, but of course people can always contact me if they need to. Right, so now that I've managed to share my screen, this is a webinar on, or a presentation on family mediation and how to maximise your results and to minimise conflict. Before we begin, I think the important aspect is for me to help you to get, to work out how to get the most out of mediation. So mediation sometimes fails because of the common mistakes that people make. So we're going to be talking about some of that. We're going to be talking about the difference between being child-centered in your thinking and your approach and being child-focused. And knowing the difference between those can help you to get the best results. Knowing what's in and out of your control. Emotional and practical preparation, I'll address those separately. We are going to talk about difficult personalities and how to manage them without destroying your soul, because I know that they are very difficult indeed. And I also want to touch on the difference between parental alienation and parental estrangement and why this is a really important distinction between these two. So that's what we're going to cover. Now, this is something that I hear all the time, we can't agree on anything. And I want to just offer this little bit of food for thought. It's a quote that I use often and one that I think really can make a difference if you take this on board. Peacemaking does not mean passivity. It is the act of interrupting injustice without mirroring injustice. It's the act of disarming evil without destroying the evildoer. The act of finding a third way that is neither fight nor flight, but the careful, arduous pursuit of the reconciliation and justice. Now, you might want to come back to this slide. I have shared the slides previously, but you might want to come back to this slide and read that over and over and over again. And I think the important line here is in how to approach these things is disarming evil without destroying the evildoer. We have to take the higher ground. And when you're facing confrontation, when you're facing conflict, you can disrupt what's going on without destroying the other person. So that's my strongest message to everybody. Now we'll go through and work out how I can help you to do that. Before we start though, the purpose of mediation, I think this is something that most people are aware of. Family mediation is an intermediary step that helps you to, be able to resolve disputes outside of court. And so it's that step in between, okay, we've separated and we can't work things out. So you go to a mediator, or, you can't work things out, so you go to a mediator. If you can't resolve them, then of course you can file in the court. But that's the last place that really most families need to end up. It's a strictly confidential process and we can't be called on to give evidence in any way, and you can't talk about it with anybody other than with your lawyer or anybody who's a party to the mediation and who will also have signed a confidentiality contract. So now it's a requirement of the court, and this is particularly relevant now that the courts have merged, that there's a high emphasis on parents reaching agreement. So they want to see a genuine attempt at mediation and that you've actually really tried. And in many cases now the courts will reorder people back to mediation to have another go. and to see if, you can, if you've gotten to a certain point, can you get a little bit further? And that's something that I really wholeheartedly embrace. Now, we follow a strict process to determine suitability to mediate, and that includes domestic violence screening and or mental and emotional capacity to mediate, because not everybody has that. And so there are some cases that are not suitable for mediation, either because of domestic violence, where it is too impactful for the person or for the parties to consider to continue. And then there's also those who are just simply don't have the capacity to be able to mediate. Now, mediation is not only those things, it's not only a gateway to the court, and this is something that I really want to get across to people. It can also be ongoing conferences to assist you in navigating your disputes. It does not have to be a one-off thing, and I've often said that putting people into a mediation room for 4 hours or 6 hours and expecting them to resolve 20 years of disputes is akin to putting them into a pressure cooker and expecting them not to boil. It is a high pressure environment when we do that. And so my approach is that, often this is something that can be done over time. So we can, reconvene in a month's time or in 2 months' time, or you might want to check in with a mediator once every 6 months or every 12 months even, just to see how things are going. We're there, to assist you as your children grow up and as they develop and their needs change, perhaps your needs change. It can help you to facilitate difficult conversations or to get clarity around things that you don't understand. So the common mistakes on why mediation fails, this is quite a big one, but people obstructing the process, I mean, you can read through these, but I've kind of got points on each of them as well. People do obstruct the process. There's little that we as mediators can do that, but sometimes people who are saying that they want to mediate and that they want to reach agreements are also obstructing the process, and that comes from their behaviours in mediation. If they're blocking the mediator's attempts to be able to get them to see some perspective or to facilitate conversations in a way that is safe for each party. People not giving full disclosure, that can be anything from domestic violence, and that's why we do so much domestic violence screening, but it could be financial disclosure, it could be past relationships, it could be a whole lot of stuff. So it's helpful for us if you can entrust us with that process to disclose as much as we need to know and to answer the questions truthfully. Now, my third point here is being aggressive or hostile to the mediator or to the other party. This does not help mediation in any way. Some people have a very skewed thinking on the way they approach mediation, and being aggressive in a mediation is not going to assist you. And that doesn't mean that as the mediator, we're just going to judge you out of the park, but it simply blocks the process, and it doesn't allow for healthy conversations. So it's very difficult for us to manage in those circumstances, and we certainly are not going to let you be hostile in front of the other party. So that needs to be tempered considerably. As I said just a minute ago, trying to resolve 10 years of disputes in a single day is a flawed concept. Not understanding how to negotiate. So this is a big one, and a lot of people don't realise that mediation is give and take, and that ultimately you're looking for a win-win for both parties, and that the conversations can help to facilitate that. Now, I think the average Australian is probably used to negotiating might be the cost of a t-shirt in Bali. Now, there's a lot more to it than that. And I think as Lee Fisher said from Family Law 101, in commercial law, there's like 9 attempts at mediation before you actually get to reach agreement or full agreement. And so, it can be this kind of backwards and forwards, give and take. You've got to have things that you come to the party with in order to be able to get the outcome that you want. You have to have a fallback position as well. I'll be talking more about that shortly. So lack of preparation is also under the not understanding how to negotiate, being unwilling or unable to consider alternatives, being dogmatic, so trying to drive the process that there's only one way. There is always more than one way. Poor communication skills, not coming, and that can be not coming across in the way that you intended. So it's not necessarily an intentional act. Sometimes it's just the simple fact that you're not getting your message across. And so that's partly our role as well, is to help facilitate that. So, you know, a mediator might sort of reframe that for you. So if I'm understanding you correctly, what you're trying to say is, for example. And also I will say unskilled mediators, and we've all been there, so be patient with us. And also aggressive legal involvement, which, and especially if you've got those two things combined. And with lawyers in family mediation, they are there to support their client and to help their client understand the implications of decisions, but they're not there to run the mediation. That's our job. Now we're going to talk about the difference between being child-focused or child-centred. Now, I'll just go through what both of these things are. Now, being child-focused is a well-intended and commonly accepted position of what's in the best interests of the child. The problem is that it's a very linear or myopic view. So as a parent, I can look at my children and I can say I'm being child-focused because I'm deciding what I think is in their best interests. But it can also create conflict, because while I might be deciding that and being child-focused and my co-parent is doing the same, these two paths are not meeting. And the reason they're not meeting is because they're driven by the wants and needs of the parent, not so much from what the child's perspective of this is. So I like to use the term being child-centred and taking the approach that this is really actually the optimal position, because it's attuned to the fundamental needs of the child. It's empathetic of the child's position, and it considers what the child's experience of this is like. There's an article on my website called "What's It Like to Be Your Child?" and that goes through some of the questions that we frame around this. I think I might be using those in a couple of minutes. But sometimes being child-centred means a sacrifice, and it's a sacrifice on behalf of often both the parents to meet the child's needs and to consider this from how's this child's experience of our divorce going to be, or separation. So what's it like to be your child? So these are some questions that I like to pose for parents, and some in certain circumstances I use these and similar. There's certainly an awful lot more that can be asked about what's it like to be your child in living in their everyday life. So how does it feel for them at changeovers? So this is perspective taking from the child's point of view. If you think about your child's experience when they're going through a changeover, what are all the things that they're going through? How does it feel to be them when they arrive? So they might be happy to see you. What other feelings are they feeling as they leave their other parent? And this can go a long way to explaining a lot of the behaviour changes at changeovers, and why one parent will say one thing and another parent will say another thing. How does it feel to be them when they have to say goodbye to you? You know, what does it feel like to them when they've got to leave you and know that they might not see you for you know, X amount of days? It might be 5 days, it might be 10 days. What does it feel like to be them in that moment? And if you're the co-parent in that situation, what does it feel like to be your child when they know that they're waving goodbye to mummy or daddy and they're not going to see them for some time? And so, you know, they're the things, sort of, particularly changeovers is such a conflict-fraught time, and it's often one where both parents will have a completely different perspective of what's going on. And this is why, because the attunement to the child is needed to actually understand what's going on for them. And what does it, this is particularly true for older children, but what's it like to be them when they need to ask for something that needs approval from both of you, and they know that there's conflict, or they know that you fight over these things? How would it feel to have to go and ask permission from somebody or from one of your parents in relation to getting a what do you call it, an approval note to go on an excursion with school, or to buy a pair of shoes that they know is expensive, something along those lines? Like, how does it feel to be them in those moments? And of course, it doesn't take away from the fact that these are important decisions that need to be made. Not every child's going to get everything, but what's their experience of this like? And how do they feel when they sense conflict between the two of you, that something is going on that is not, it is causing them to feel distress or upset or hurt when they hear you arguing? What does it actually feel like when they're experiencing that? And that's why, there's a very high emphasis on needing to keep that conflict away from children, so that children don't see or hear or feel the impact of what's going on between the two of you. Right, so we're going to talk about decision making and now, timing of mediation, practical preparation and emotional preparation for mediation. So in terms of decisions, some very child-centered ways to focus this is when you're making a decision, everything should be filtered through what impact will this decision have on my children? And is it one that I'm intentionally making? What practical changes will this mean for them? So, as you're making decisions on parenting time, what's this actually going to look like for them? How's their experience of this going to be? It might be that you're making the decision to pick up and drop off from school. That's probably usually the least impactful when there's conflict. But when you're making these decisions in mediation, when you're coming to these practical decisions, we're here to help you work through all of this and to reality test some of these things. And it might be that, the handover's being done at McDonald's or something along those lines. And some children find that quite sort of distressing. And I know that there's reasons around why it's done there, or even at police stations. But those reasons normally revolve around safety. But you have to consider what it's actually like for the child, and what's the safest, most child-centered way that I can come to these decisions. So what I suppose my biggest message is, and how I try and help people in mediation, is what causes the least amount of harm to the children. So the sacrifice when it's necessary here should, and notwithstanding safety provisions, but should be the least amount of harm to the child, or the least amount of impact to the child, and that you're not accidentally making a decision that might cause more harm than is necessary. So when's a good time to mediate? Now, I actually get asked this a lot in terms of, or people think that they've done mediation once, so it's not, it's too late for that. We tried that and it didn't work. But as I said at the start, this can be and should be an ongoing service. So whenever there's an issue that needs to be resolved, an outside assistance would help. That's the first and most obvious one. And I think part of the misunderstanding about what we do as mediators is that it doesn't have to be an expensive full-day journey. You can catch up with a mediator for an hour, with a private mediator anyway. I don't think this is available at the relationship centres, but you can ask. But we can catch up with you for an hour to resolve a minor dispute. It's not going to cost you much. It's better than having ongoing conflict. So, check back in with a mediator, probably not every time there's something, but try and resolve issues yourselves. But as things develop, then, you know, if something comes up, then go back to mediation. It's always a good time to mediate when somebody else is requesting it. Now, if somebody else is requesting it, but you don't think it's necessary, it's probably necessary because they're feeling the conflict, or they're feeling unsure, or there might be more to it and they don't feel confident or safe to be able to express that to you themselves. And so it's a good time to mediate. Don't let these things fester and turn into more conflict. When you've noticed that previously made agreements aren't working as intended. Now, as mediators, we don't have the capacity to change orders if there's already orders made, but we can help with you making decisions that work within orders, and or any parenting agreement, which actually can be modified, providing it's not signed into consent orders. So when things aren't working and or they're not working in the way that it was intended or the way that you thought. And that's quite simply because families are dynamic or organic growing structures. Children get older, jobs change for parents, positions change, relationships change, all sorts of things happen that mean that you know, sometimes what you intended isn't actually what's working out. And there's lots of different things as well, like new partners, if you want to go on holiday. But just remember that we're not the gateway, or we're not only the gateway to court. And I don't like us being, as mediators, being seen as just a gateway to court, because it's a really unfair representation of what we do. And that's on us, and it's on the legal profession and anybody in the family law fraternity to change as well. But we are here for far more than that. Now, emotional readiness. This is a big one because, you know, like family conflicts, family law, separation, divorce, all of those things trigger us at our very core into the limbic brain. It addresses things like we respond from our fight, flight and freeze response. And I know in Family Law 101, they went into that a little bit more on another webinar, and throughout the Parenting After Separation courses that I provide, I also address this issue because it is at the root cause of how we react versus respond in situations. I don't have the capacity to go through that here now, but you know, it's a lot of people understand it. But having a plan helps with remaining calm. So in your emotional readiness, it's what are all the things that I can do myself. So if I address my fight, flight and freeze response, what's my likely response? How do I normally respond to situations? And what can I do to maximize my response in a way that is going to get the best outcome that I can for my children and for myself? And so having a plan, you know, what other things you need to discuss, what are my fallback positions? To avoid rigid thinking, because rigid thinking is like, it's going to be this way. I mean, 50-50 is a common one. So people will say it's going to be 50-50 or it's nothing at all. We'll go to court and we'll battle it out. Well, there's a whole lot of stuff I can say around 50-50. I wholeheartedly support shared parenting, of course. And sometimes 50-50 is the best approach, the fair approach, the right approach. What the children want, and I encourage it wherever it is possible that be the outcome, but it's not the only outcome. So, you know, there's lots of ways to co-parent, and there's lots of ways to share time. And so in perspective taking, you need to actually consider all of those things. But I shouldn't get bogged down in 50-50, but it's the rigid thinking that goes with that. That is the problem. And it's also seen in, oh, look, pretty much every aspect of mediation, you know, that it's going to be this way or it's not going to be at all. And you need to be able to take perspective. And if you can't, then you need to get help to be able to take perspective. So look for solutions, not fueling problems. And I think this is something that, you know, every mediator will face, you know, quite often, is that people are, but especially by rigid thinking, actually, that they're driving more conflict rather than taking an approach of, well, how can we solve this? How can I make this better? And what's the least impactful way to be able to do this? So know your negotiable and non-negotiable points. And it's fine that there are some non-negotiable points, but know what they are and know what things you can give on, because a little bit of give and take goes an awful long way. Avoid becoming hostile or aggressive. As I said previously, this is a real thing in mediation, unfortunately. And it can be, it just completely blocks the process. And really it's what it's doing is proving to the mediator everything that the other person said about you. So, you know, it's sort of, it's not cool and it's not clever, and it won't get you the outcomes that you're looking for, because you simply cannot mediate when you're, you know, having this really dogmatic approach. And it's not to say that being assertive is not the right thing to do. Being assertive absolutely is the right thing to do. There's just more ways than being aggressive, confrontational, conflictive, to be able to get results. And in fact, you'll get far better results if you can just keep things calm, keep an open mind. Now, practical considerations. So there is a lot to consider in this, and I think the idea of me sort of putting these questions out to parents is that we often think of what the outcome is, but we don't think about what the backstory for that is, or what the practicality of that is, and how you're going to get to this point. So, you know, your decision making is going to be largely affected by what the co-parenting relationship is now. And if the co-parenting relationship is really hostile, is really aggressive, or is really just even high conflict in general, then how is that going to impact the decision making? And what can you do to mitigate that pre-mediation or in mediation? So how's your proposal intended to work? You need to consider the small details, all of the oh no situations, as I call them, you know, the things that you just didn't expect to come up. And this actual task requires some thought and some practical thinking. And it might be that a parent gets sick. It might be that that something changes that you weren't anticipating. You might get let go from your job, or you might have a new relationship, and that changes the way you want to share the time with the children. So try and think. You can't factor in everything, but there are things that you need to factor in, as for instance, who's going to care for the children if one or the other of you can't make it. So what impact will these decisions have on the children, obviously, in a child-centred approach? And when you're making a plan, it's really helpful. This is a coaching technique that I've used with clients for years. But how will you know if this is working? What things will be happening in your life? What things will be happening in the children's lives? How will your emotions be when this is actually working as intended? How will your co-parents' emotions be? Will things be calmer? And how will you know that? Like, what actual things will be happening? Will communication be better? Will you be a lot less stressed? Will you be, you know, feeling happier? What sort of things would you be doing if everything was working really well? And while you can envision that utopian situation, you also need to be able to create a vision around, well, what's going to be happening if it's not? What are the things that are going to be present in my life that would not be there if things were working well? So might be that your sleep's being disrupted because you're worrying about certain things, or you might be sensing more conflict. That might be, you might see behavioural changes in the children if there's sort of continuing or ongoing conflict. So the thing is, what happens then, right? So what are your alternatives? And these are techniques that sometimes I use in a pre-mediation session or a mediation coaching session, getting somebody else prepared to mediate with with another mediator. But they're all things that are, you know, really worthwhile in considering all the what if scenarios, and if it's working, what's life like? And if it's not working, what's actually happening then? And what's the fallback position? What will happen then? Do we go back to mediation? Do we have a third party friend who's going to, you know, agree to have this conversation? Are we going to just have this conversation ourselves and see if we can work this out first and then maybe get some assistance? Right. The one thing that everybody wants to know about and everybody wants to know a perspective on: high conflict personalities. This is a very, very difficult subject to address because everybody's different and their experiences are different. There's a whole range of personality disorders out there in the community, and most people, many people, are walking around undiagnosed. So in relation to co-parenting and in relation to mediation particularly, what I often say to parents is it's better to know who they are. You know, once you've seen it, it can't be unseen. But, you know, we're not in the position of, I'm not capable of diagnosing what somebody else's personality disorder is, and neither are 99.9% of you. So you have to be very careful with that. But it's the behaviours that you're looking for. So what kind of things do they do that that make them high conflict? Now, being high conflict is a whole other conversation, and it's not the purpose of this now, but you know, I address this in to some degree in the Parenting After Separation course, but also in the Breaking the Cycle of Conflict course. But you need to learn strategies to break the cycle of conflict, and by that, to improve your communication and to learn what to let go of, and what things in fact to hold on to as well. Now, this isn't to say that you have to give in on everything. It doesn't mean that at all. But there are certain ways that you can change your communication patterns that it actually disrupts this. And as Lee mentioned that when we did the live webinar, I had one client or student rather of my courses email me afterwards and said he was going to call me the ex-whisperer. All he had done was change his communication with his other parent, with the co-parent, and everything changed, everything got better. So you need to consider that it's the way you deal with conflict. It's the way you hold on to, you know, some of the past things, the microaggressions, the little niggly things that just build up over time and then just, you know, start to fester. But it's how you react and respond to what they say. And when you know the devil, for want of a better term, but when you can see them for what they are, it's like, well, how do I work around this? You know, this is something that I can't change. I can't, like, you can't change them. I can't change them. So how am I going to work around this to get the best result? Because butting heads with that for life is going to be just a lifetime of trauma for you. So learn how to manage with what you've got. Another thing that I try and get across to people is that not everything needs a response. So not everything needs to be answered. People want to answer every bit of minutiae. They don't want to defend absolutely every point of, let's say, in an affidavit, you know, every point that person has made, they want to answer. And not everything, some things you can just let go through to the keeper. It's very judgy, and it feels like character assassination, particularly when you're feeling when you're, you know, dealing with the court, or when you basically any time when you read something in writing. It's a horrible feeling, but not everything needs a response. There are some things that some people write and I just go, well, that shows who they are. It doesn't say anything about you. It says a lot about them. So learn to manage your own emotions in relation to high conflict people. And learn to really be in control of yourself at all times. And it's very hard. I'm not for a moment suggesting that this is easy. It's actually really, really difficult. But it's a skill set, and it will help you in every aspect of your life. So learn to control your own emotions and how you respond to them. Be aware of the microaggressions and triggers, as I mentioned earlier. You can start to say yes more often on smaller issues, and yes, you may still need to go head to head on the bigger issues, but don't get caught in this pattern of conflict of saying no to everything simply because you have a great dislike for them. And seeking clarity from high conflict personalities is a good thing to do. So ask them to explain what they mean, or to explain alternative scenarios, are the two examples that I've given there. Now, what this does is switches them from their right brain thinking mode into their left brain thinking mode, which is more responsive, more engaging. Sort of when you make somebody think, they have to actually stop and reassess. So, I mean, you don't like pepper bullet people with questions, but there are always some questions that you can ask that help to actually get clarity. So can you explain that to me? Like, what I'm not understanding how you think that's going to work, and see if you can start to engage them in conversations. Again, this comes down to communication strategies. Now, the non-negotiable co-parents, which are often the high conflict co-parents, they're usually reliant on two things: expecting that the other parent will give up or give in, or that the complaining parent will never give up and the dispute rages on, which is something that they, also feel like they've got a victory in. So you need to work around those two things, the whole never giving up. And I'm not saying that you need to give in, but this is what high conflict parents are actually looking for. In either of those scenarios, and despite what you think of the other one, the children have lost. So you need to be very careful about how you manage those situations when you're dealing with somebody who is inherently high conflict. And in terms of what to do, seek therapy or counselling, do some education, learn to understand who they are, what they are, and how they're presenting, and how to manage yourself during this time. So when I say seek therapy in regards to that, it really is with all empathy that I say that. It is, these people are very, very taxing on you, and it's very hard to understand, how to reconcile how this makes you feel when you know that actually you're not the aggressor here. And it can be soul destroying. So get the help that you need in whatever format you need to be able to get through, and let go of expecting them to change or apologise. You can only control yourself in this process, and that's one of the hardest lessons that a lot of people have to understand. Nothing you do is going to change them. Some of these people can't even change themselves if they were willing to. So just bear that in mind. Sorry, that's the not so good news slide. Parental alienation or parental estrangement. We're going to talk about the very important difference. So parental alienation is when a child rejects parents that they previously had a loving relationship with prior to the separation. It's when a child has been coached or coerced into choosing sides, when a child is abducted or otherwise withheld from all contact and allegations of abuse are unsubstantiated. That's it in a nutshell. Now, and it's a horrible thing to go through. And there are many people out there who I talk to every day who say, I've been alienated. And so for me, there's a whole series of questions that I ask, according to the situation, the circumstances, and actually what's happened. My recommendation, if you are going through alienation and that those factors have been met, is to get the appropriate support. Find a mediator who is informed about parental alienation, if, in terms of like coming to mediation. Find somebody who's informed, and, if you're going through court, that your lawyer also needs to be informed on PA. Consider things like child inclusive mediation, because although it's a tenuous line, you need specific advice on that one. But child inclusive mediation can actually help to get the voice of the child. If that child has already been alienated, fully alienated, and their minds are, very much turned against the other parent, or they've been coached into making disclosures, then that can be difficult. But it's in the early stages, it can be very appropriate. Always take the high road. It's very difficult, I know, but that's why I say get help, get support, and try and always just be the better person, the better parent. It's again, very difficult. And, you know, this is the sort of thing that is kind of a long conversation. It's not the purpose of going through to that in this slide here at the moment or in this presentation. Now, don't do anything that contributes to their allocations, and they will try and trick you into this. And that's, you know, they're always trying to trip you up to prove that you have done something. And so don't, oh, pardon me, sorry, a door slammed in my house. Don't do anything that will actually feed what it is that they're saying. So it's a difficult situation, and one that does need a lot of support for parents. Now we're going to talk about parental estrangement, because this is something that most people aren't aware of or don't consider. And there's a lot of people out there beating the parental alienation drum when in fact the issue is actually estrangement. So parental estrangement is when a child rejects a parent because of the actions of that parent. And those actions can be toward the child or toward the other parent. And so these are action, or could be just actions of their own behaviour, such as substance abuse, drugs or alcohol, or it could be, well, we've already talked about violence and aggression. So where there's been a DV incident that has changed the child's perception of that parent, and when a protective parent takes action for a substantial family violence event. When those things are present, this is parental estrangement. It's not alienation. And estrangement, so the estrangement is that the child or the other or the protective parent has made a has made a choice that, you know, this is a safety issue. Children's experience of seeing their parents do something, you know, bad or negative, or hearing something that they think is bad or negative, causes them to align with the other parent. So it's a really important distinction, and one that that, you know, needs addressing in family law more. In terms of mediation, it helps us as mediators to be able to work out, well, is this an estrangement issue or is this an alienation issue? So in the case of estrangement, I mean, what I say there in the what to do is take responsibility for your actions. You're going to get better outcomes if you can do that. If everybody can do that in society, I'd be stoked. But take responsibility for your actions. Consult a therapist for ongoing treatment for whatever it is that you've done. And also just looking at, you know, that can help with everything. You know, where has this come from? Why did I behave that way? What about substance abuse? Do I need to go into a treatment centre? Do I need to, you know, what do I need to do in order to be better? And don't, like, I don't say that, like I say that with all consideration for you as a human being. We can all be better, right? You know, we can all do things to improve. So the obvious ones, behaviour change programs, anger management programs, or other personal development courses, usually in consultation with seeing a therapist or seeing somebody for treatment if necessary. It really depends on what it is. And then consider attempting reunification with the child only at the time when you're mentally and emotionally well. Now, in mediation, this would be something that, you know, I would sort of consider as, well, what's the short-term plan here to give this parent time to get better? So it might be 6 months or 12 months. Okay, so what can we do within that time, you know, to make sure that there's still some form of contact, or, you know, that there's, you know, there's safety provisions, and that, you know, the children can still have some kind of a relationship. And then we revisit it in 12 months' time or 6 months' time, whatever, right? To see, okay, well, what's changed, and now what can happen? Now what can happen going forward? So as mediators, again, don't forget that this is something that can be, you know, okay, well, we might need to, these are the things you need to address. We might need to check in. So this would be driven by the other parent. You know, I want them to be X, Y, Z, or you know, it might be the recommendation of a therapist. It might be, there could be a whole lot of provisions around that. And when these are genuine concerns, when they're substantiated concerns, then these are things that you need to address. So we'll move on from that. How to be your own peacemaker. You remember the quote that I gave you at the start. So really this is about becoming solution focused and changing the way you view things to being a problem solving person. You know, how can I solve this problem? Not how do I keep reacting to somebody else's problem. So the things that you can expect to control, you'll find this on our social media sites, as well as within some of my course content. But this is a little good one, a good little one to review and to have a little look at. Think about the things that are in your own control and things that are out of your control, and then things that are or should be in the joint control of you as parents. I won't labour too long here. There's an awful lot of information in there, but consider that. Maybe pop over to our Facebook page or Instagram page and you'll see that. So also finding a middle ground. I talk about this a lot through, you know, through my courses, but in mediation preparation, it's about what things have you agreed on in the past and how did you come to those agreements? What are the important components of those that we can employ to get agreement on X, Y, Z things, you know, whatever things are coming up for you now. And, you know, when you consider the other person's or the other party's requests, do you really understand their motivations? And if you haven't asked them what their motivations are, you probably don't understand them. What are your motives and why are they important to you? So these are things for you to consider prior to going into mediation. And I know it's a lot of work, but they're, and yep, my hand's up, you can get help to work through some of these issues. But, you know, you have to really think about all of the things around this. So how do I actually work out what middle ground is here? And you can't do that until you actually address some of the underlying stuff. What fears do you have? That's a really big one because it drives the fight, flight, freeze response. And it drives the way we react and respond to things. But if you can start to talk about what fears you have and address those fears in mediation or pre-mediation, then as mediators, it helps us to understand what's driving your decisions, but it helps you to be able to explain yourself better and to start to improve communication. And I just will say on fears too, that not all fears are real, not all fears are valid. So there are a lot of things, there's a lot of reality testing that I do with people, well, what's driving that decision? And, you know, what experience have you got in the past that actually says that that's valid? And so anyway, there's a whole lot of stuff around that. So being solution focused means being able to identify the problem, consider the issues and the importance of addressing that problem, being able to identify your proposed solution and the benefits that it will bring, and listening to alternatives, because being solution focused by nature means that there is another perspective here that also has to be considered. Your responsibility. If I could change one thing across all society, it would be getting people to accept their responsibility more and their role in things. And, you know, it's in relation to mediation, it's your responsibility to control your emotions, to get your point across in a way that's non-confrontational. We'll help as mediators, we'll help to facilitate that. We might temper some things, we might, you know, reframe for you so that it's said in a better way, just because not everybody has those communication skills, as I said. But it's your responsibility also to express yourself in a way that that gets your true sentiment and the true meaning of what you want to say across. It's your responsibility to not buy into conflict and to not react or overreact to all of the little microaggressions and triggers and things like that that may come up. And it is also your responsibility just to do your best. So the reason I put that last one in there is really because I know this stuff is really hard and none of us are perfect. You know, if you can make just 1 point of change in your life each week, or even each month, if that's what it takes, then over time you'll work out that, you know, things have gotten better. So you do your best with what you've got, and you just keep trying until such time as you get there. It's like anything, it's any kind of discipline, whether it's a martial arts discipline or yoga or meditation, anything really. It's these things are that it takes practice, it takes repetition, and over time things will get better. You will get better. So yeah, sort of being solution focused is also about non-hostile approaches being considered, having involved a level of empathy, and asking, inquiring questions of the other person to get clarity. And as I've said, considerate of alternatives. It's people think that they can go into mediation without having some consideration. So the last slide that we've got here, we're almost done. The next steps for people really is to begin to heal from the grief and trauma. It's something that people don't, can be really hard if you're actually in family court to do that while you're in the process of it. But by and large, it's something that we don't really address enough. Get counselling, engage in personal development, education, do as much education as you can. Get adequate professional support and get adequate personal support, and be aware of people who are taking you down rabbit holes and sort of enabling you into negative patterns. Just be conscious of that, right? You need to row your own boat here. You need to take your own voyage. And as I say to everyone, look after your health and fitness. And that might be just small changes often, but it really does lift the endorphins and helps you to feel better. And be better. You know, we all function better when we're healthy, and as a society, that's, you know, just something that's better for all of us. So they're really my key points. That's how to contact us. I hope this was beneficial for you. And look, what you're going through is really difficult, and I understand that, mediators understand that. By and large, just, you know, my key message for all of this is that we are not just the gatekeepers to court. There is so much more that a mediator can help you with, and or help direct you to, in order for things to get better and to improve, and to get you to getting better outcomes, to managing your emotions, to minimising conflict wherever possible. And of course, the overarching thing is that all of your decision making will have the least amount of impact on the children. So that's it from me. Thank you. And there's information on how to contact us on the website.